news919.com.
Live on News Talk Radio News 91.9. It's McLean in the morning. Now, here's Tyler McLean.
We're back at 9:07. This is hard to believe that we're almost to a year since that tragedy in Newtown, Connecticut, back on December 14th, 2012. That's when a gunman killed 20 first graders and 6 educators at Sandy Hook Elementary School there in Connecticut. On Monday of this week, a state investigation into that killing concluded that shooter Adam Lanza acted alone but couldn't provide a definitive motive for his attack. In the aftermath of that devastation, the community has had to face a lot of painful decisions, including, and you might forget, what do you do with the school itself, which is just a horrid crime scene and a painful reminder for a lot of people. I don't think you could go back there. I don't think you could turn it into anything else. Richard Harwood is an expert in helping communities deal with difficult changes. He spent several weeks earlier this year working with the people of Newtown, helping a 28-person task force grapple with just that undertaking. Richard Harwood, founder of the Harwood Institute, joins us on the phone from Chestertown, Maryland this morning. He joins us. Hi, Richard. Good to talk to you. Thanks for doing this.
Good morning, Tyler. Thanks for having me.
Quickly, before we get into all of this, explain the Harwood Institute. How did that develop for you?
Well, I started it about 25 or so years ago when I was 27, and what we do is we help individuals and organizations turn outward toward their communities and help generate the kind of change that people are looking for in their communities in a positive, productive way. And we work across the United States. We're doing some work in Canada and any number of other countries around the world.
So you cast a wide net. How did you get on the radar of those in Newtown who were trying to get over this tragedy?
They, as you said in the intro, they faced this hard decision. What do you do with an elementary school where 26 people were gunned down? The children from that school had been, the children who had survived had been moved to an adjacent school district. The school was left empty. There were fences placed all around it and security guards, and they really needed to decide, would they go back to the school? Would they build a new elementary school someplace else? Or, as the decision was made, they decided to raise the existing building and rebuild on that site, but an entirely new building. And I was asked to come in as someone who had worked on tough issues before, emotional issues, and help design and lead a process by which they could move forward.
If you're the local government there, I'm sure if you just went ahead with this and said, I don't think anybody would reopen that school the way it was. I don't think anybody in the right mind would. But if they even had their own ideas about what to do to redevelop that space or whether to make a memorial or whatever, there is no way you could please everyone. And I think that's probably why they took such a community-based approach to get that feedback.
Yeah, we started this process. I got called in February. We started the process in March, and it went through the first week or so of May. And Tyler, even when we began this process, as you said, they put 28 elected officials together from 4 different governing boards who had never worked together. It was kind of a recipe for political grandstanding and posturing for people to pursue their own agenda. It was not even clear whether or not the community was ready to talk about this issue, let alone make a decision. And you're right, there were lots of different opinions in the community, and in the end, ultimately, they made a unanimous decision to move forward. But when we began, it was not clear how this would turn out and how it would unfold.
Yeah, I'm sure there were a number of community meetings designed to get right to the heart of this, and maybe some people were ready. Maybe they'd waited long enough and they could speak, but I'm sure there was just as many who really didn't know how to communicate their thoughts or what the town should do.
No, it's funny. When I began this process, on the surface, it looked as though this was a decision about what to do about an elementary school building, and it was that. But as you're suggesting, as we got into it, what we realized it was about something much deeper, much more profound. It was whether or not a community could make a pivot from a sense of trauma and despair to healing and hope. And it was very difficult. During the public process that we held that went over this month and a half or 2 month period, we heard from families of victims, families of survivors, from teachers who had witnessed the trauma and who had protected the children in storerooms and bathrooms and other places, from neighbors where children had run to their homes during this crisis and the neighbors protected the children. It was a highly emotional, really traumatic experience to go through the shooting, but also to then have to work through in a public way this decision about whether or not they were ready to move forward or not.
Did you get a chance to get to know any of the parents of some of the kids who died there?
Well, I met people from all across the community, and it was it's heartbreaking to talk to folks who were touched by this. And I think one of the things that's interesting about and worth noting here is, Newtown's a town of 27,000 people. It's a small New England town in Connecticut. And, wherever I went in the community, you felt as though you were touched by this tragedy. You saw signs in the community that were up in stores and in libraries and other places. We are Sandy Hook, we choose love. You saw cards that were written by people in Montana, clear across the United States, wishing the community well, that were hanging up in a diner called the Blue Colony Diner, where I would eat most of my meals. No matter where you went, you felt enveloped by this tragedy, and it's something the town, as you can imagine, is still dealing with.
What's that like to be there at all? What kind of a place is it? Is it a place where I guess a lot of Canadians could relate to American life on all kinds of fronts, but is it just your regular town in America, or is it different?
Well, as I mentioned, it's a small New England town. It's 27,000 people. It's the type of town that many people move to because it's tight-knit, because it has very good schools, because it's kind of the all-American life where your kids can play sports and you can feel safe and protected. And, through this tragedy, all of that, in a sense, was blown up. But, I think in a town like this, which is a kind of all-American town, while this was a defining moment, I think what folks there have decided is it won't come to define the community, that the community itself needs to move forward and pick itself up and figure out how it can heal and keep moving ahead.
What about examining one other part of this, and this may or may not come up, but do people talk about the shooter in this and still ask those questions, and does that frequently get brought up as much as the victims?
Yeah, it's really inexplicable, as you mentioned in the intro. The state's attorney report that came out on Monday talks a lot about Adam Lanza, the gunman. He was 20 years old. What becomes clear from the report is that he experienced long-term mental health issues. When they went to his bedroom, Tyler, and looked around, what they found were spreadsheets, Excel spreadsheets of mass murders that he had sort of been following, including the Columbine shooting in Colorado. He had pictures of people who had been bludgeoned and sort of wrapped in plastic. He had incredibly violent videos and video games that he used. And I think, people in Newtown, what the report didn't say, while it talked about all these things in Adam Lanza's bedroom and in his history, it still could not reveal a motive for why he did this. It's still unclear about how this came about in his mind and why he decided to act and why he decided to go to an elementary school of all places. And so I think people in Newtown still very much are struggling with the question why. Why did this happen? How could it have happened? And how did it happen in this small New England town of 27,000 people?
And getting away from the whys and the hows, because that's what really would consume people after. And I could see how there'd be even more frustration this week after that investigation, couldn't provide that motive. But, when you go in there earlier this year and you have several meetings with a lot of folks in the community, you try to figure out, how do we represent this space? And I'll give you two other ideas that, we've seen this play out in the news over the past few years. One of them, and these are different ends of the spectrum too. Look at that horrible event that happened in Cleveland with Ariel Castro, and he kept those women hostage for years. And that sort of played out in the media. There are books coming about that. There were feature interviews on television. They got rid of that house. You wouldn't even know it was there. The community knows. But they didn't want it there as a reminder. Then fast forward or go back in time and really look at the other side of the spectrum and look at Ground Zero in New York City and look at the World Trade Center, which is no longer there, but it's been replaced by something perhaps even more magnificent and quite an honor to those who died that day on 9/11. But, where does Sandy Hook Elementary School fall in that spectrum of how the community wants this to be recognized? Because not only do they replace the one that's there, but they have to build a new school in the same spot.
Yeah, it's a great question and a great way to think about it. I think when we started this process, Tyler, we came up with some guiding principles to guide our decision, and some of them involved keeping the children who were in that Sandy Hook Elementary School together as they continued their education, meaning not to disperse them to other schools, that people wanted the new school to be built within the Sandy Hook area. Sandy Hook is a borough, a small area, neighborhood in the sense of Newtown. So people wanted the school to be in that area again because it's a neighborhood school. And I think as people move through this decision-making process, they had to come to grips, as with these other things that you mentioned, these other incidents, they had to come to grips with whether or not they wanted to erase any sign that something had happened, or whether or not they wanted to go back in a sense, and as many people said, not let the gunman win. And I think where people came down on this was, we know we can't go back to the old school. Even if we could renovate it, we don't want to go back to that building. That was clear. But what people ultimately came to, and we looked at 40 other sites to place a new school other than the existing one, in the end, people said, we want to go back to our existing site. That's where our school has been for decades. That's where so many of our children in the past went to school. That's where we want these current students to finish out their education, and it's where we want future kids to go. So let's tear down the building. Let's demolish it. Let's build a new building that actually faces a different direction and has a different entrance way into the land. And let's go back and let's reclaim this space as our own and as part of our community. And they've done that, and I thought it was an enormously courageous decision for them to make.
And one more point to that, not just the brick and mortar example that you bring up, but, talk to a child that went there during this that's still alive, that, if you consider those opportunities, imagine going to another school and they don't rebuild Sandy Hook, and students ask, oh, what school did you come from? Oh, Sandy Hook. How do you think that conversation goes, as opposed to, I go to Sandy Hook, this is what happened?
Exactly. And a lot of it, you were asking me about who I'd met before, and I met a lot of parents of children of survivors, kids who might have been in those classrooms where the gunman came, or kids who were in Sandy Hook Elementary School while this incident occurred. And so many of them came to these public meetings and said to the task force members, we understand what happened here. Our children were affected by it, but our children are asking us now, Daddy or Mommy, when can I go back to my school? And there was great pride in that Sandy Hook Elementary School. It was a terrific school. It will continue to be a terrific school, and I think it's an important part of the community's sense of identity.
Rich, great to talk to you. Thanks so much for this.
Tyler, thanks for having me. Have a great day.
You too. Richard Harwood, founder of the Harwood Institute. He's in Maryland. He helped out in the aftermath of Newtown earlier this year, too. That anniversary a couple weeks away, of course, but demolition of that school began last month in preparation to build